talk. To kick off today's presentation and event, let's welcome our program director, Miss Tracy Chen, to give us some remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. It's really good to see some familiar faces and new faces here. So welcome. My name is Tracy Chen. I'm the Public Affairs Director at Fulbright. And it's our pleasure to have you joining us today, offline and online. Today, we're very proud to welcome 7 scholars here in Taiwan. They've been working here for 6 to 10 months. And they're working on very exciting projects from sonic art to healthcare anthropology to machine learning, global talent strategy, cultural history of Qipao and ping pong. The diverse lineup offers a fascinating window into Taiwan through the lens of international academic perspectives. Each year, Fulbright Taiwan offers 6 to 10-month grants to U.S. scholars and fellows to conduct research, teach, or a combination of both at Taiwanese institutions. These opportunities foster long-term academic collaboration and strengthen mutual understanding between Taiwan and the United States. A big thank you to Project Tyra, Taiwanese Young Researcher Association, for co-hosting today's event. As Taiwan's largest student and alumni-led nonprofit for graduate study and research, their efforts in inviting local researchers and broadcasting today's session globally reflect the heart of international exchange. Special thanks to Andrew Wang and Zheng Jingyuan from the Project Tyra's IT team, whose technical expertise made today's broadcast possible. And also to Yu Mengxuan, who's here with us today. She is the Project Tyra's PR lead for helping us promoting this event. She is also our very own Fulbright Taiwan graduate grantee who's pursuing a PhD in social work at University of Maryland. Last but not least, we thank Dr. Deng Chaoxing. Hello. Tyra Seminar Co-Lead and Assistant Professor at Chang University for co-organizing this talk series from the very beginning. So thank you very much. Joining us today as we explore a dynamic range of topics spanning technology, art, history, and policy through the lens of cross-cultural research and academic exchange. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Elizabeth Ching from the City University of New York, who will be sharing her wonderful work here in Taiwan. Dr. Ching.
Switching mics?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you so much. I just warn you, I may have to duck out a little bit early because COVID is has killed my brain. So I'll just jump right into it. But I will say that I'm just so grateful for this Fulbright. It's the first time since I did my dissertation that I've had more than the summer to do field work. And it's just been a huge, I'm going to cry. It's just been so wonderful. So this project in Taiwan is part of a much larger project, but here I've been really focusing on the traditional tailors in Taipei. And basically what's happening is that this beautiful craft tradition, which used to be controlled by men, they're old cranky Chinese men. I have one for my dad. He's not a tailor. And they're all retiring. And it's women who are now going to be continuing this tradition. And it's happening in interesting and complicated ways. So one of the people who I've spent a lot of time with is here, Nailin, and that's the Qipao that I ordered from the master, who's just around the way. And no, yeah. The next person is, this is Jessica, who is, so Master Lin, who's a national treasure. Nailin, who you saw in the first picture, is slated to take over the workshop from him. She has been there in that workshop for eight years. Apprenticeship is 3 years and 4 months, at which point you can sort of go off and be kind of independent. Jessica was also an apprentice of Master Lin. And here's a flyer from Master Lin's master from like the 80s. But what she's done, which is really interesting, is to open a business where she actually teaches upper middle class women how to make their own Qipao. So she's not really having a career as a tailor, but she's really much more of a teacher. So I could say a whole lot, but what I want to focus on today in this talk is some particular tools that are part of that tradition, and then some adventures that emerged from those tools. So prototyping the starch spreader. So yeah, we can go right to the next one. Oh yeah, oh, thank you. So I worked for about a dozen years in a design school. I'm an anthropologist, but worked in a design school really until just before I came for the Fulbright. And so one of the things that has really grown and enriched the way I do anthropology is taking things from design. Designers make things, and so making things is something that has become a very interesting, to me, part of how I do anthropology. And these traditions use very specific tools, among them the starch spreader. And in the traditional way of making clothes, a lot of the technique is really focused on manipulating the fabric into the shape you want, which is very different from Western tailoring, where you cut the shapes. And there's a little bit of show and tell here. And that's done with starch. It's also done with the iron. And so, for instance, the edges of the garment, you put the starch on there so to help it hold the shape. You can also use it to help kind of temporarily connect fabrics together. There's a whole world of how to do the starch. But the starch spreader, it turns out, they're no longer made. So you can get not very good ones, like the one in this picture, that are sort of one piece of metal, or you can get plastic ones, or you can get bamboo ones, but they're not as good as the old ones that are no longer made. So one of the first things, actually, when I arrived for the Fulbright, was to say, hey, why don't we try to prototype the starch spreader? And old tools, new techniques. So one of the other places you use the starch is in doing the bindings that you'll see that are very typical of Qipao, where you have to prepare the whole fabric by covering it with the starch, and that helps it holds its shape so that you can do the binding work. And if you want to look at show and tell somewhere later, this is one that I made not well, and this is one that the master made, and you can see like mine not very good and his very good over there. It's maniacally difficult to do. So there's a lot of precision in the work and a lot of really a dedication to perfection. So sort of one of the beauties of fieldwork is Jessica, who teaches classes, has this student, Vivian, and we were talking and she was like, oh, I know the perfect guy to do this for you. I went to high school with him. So this is Qipao, who usually makes like little teeny tiny, very detailed things out of silver. Like those are like a quarter of an inch big, right? But what was really fun was he got really into this. And so here's Jessica showing how the fabric, how she uses, he needed to see, you know, how do you use this? What do you do? So that whole discussion between the two of them was, you know, for me, extremely fascinating. She had an old scraper that the master had given her, and one of her students had broken it. So it was like, meh. So one of the big questions was, how do we prevent this from breaking? And Qipao, of course, because he knows the materials very well, looks at the old one and he's like, well, it's made of this. This is actually the new prototype, but you know, the handle is made of bronze, the blade is made of stainless steel, and going back and forth, a lot of questions about, do you need the flexibility of the blade? How do you use, you know, all kinds of very detailed questions. So this is the original scraper there. Figuring out the dimensions and all of this. And they actually ended up coming up with dimensions that where the key numbers were 168, and they decided 168 were good numbers. So I loved that they were integrating that into how they were putting this together. So it has slightly different dimensions than the original one. Qipao, then, this is the original one, produces this one, which is here. And one of the key things he did was to make this join. You can see it's now more of a kind of like the shape of an axe head. So it's very strong, because when you do the starch, you're often pushing and putting a lot of pressure. And so he specifically designed it to withstand that pressure. We shall see. So, but part of what, again, was very fun and exciting. We had the first meeting, and then he's like, and then you're going to come back and we're going to try it out and you're going to video. And I'm like, yes, I will. I will do the video. Was also, he's like, and then you can get your name laser cut onto it. So the one that you have now is the handmade prototype, which is the first thing. And then he made a mold of the handle, and we're waiting for the ones that we've ordered. Mass production, which is like a total run of 20. Mass production. But again, in terms of thinking about field work and relationships, one of the things that I'm always trying to do when I do field work is to have some aspect of the research provide something meaningful or useful to the people that I'm working with. And so the starch spreader was something that, you know, was very exciting for Jessica and then also her students to have this object that they can't get another way. It was great because Qipao's a struggling craft artist and he got a bunch of work out of this. And of course, it was great for me because I got to see that process happening. But the additional thing that happened that was really exciting was what happened with the rulers, right? Which are traditionally, this is the old ruler. And again, the rulers are being hoarded by people because not only are they old bamboo rulers, which are it's very hard to get bamboo rulers now. You can get them in Japan. But they use a measurement that is neither the imperial inch nor a centimeter. It's the Chinese inch. And so if you're going to do things the truly, you know, correct way, which, you know, there's lots of variations, you want to use that measurement. So I had gone somewhere, I think that I went to Hangzhou or something, and I come back and basically a different student of Jessica's who runs a company where they make fireproof construction materials said, oh, I know somebody who can do the rulers for you. And they went and made these on their own. And the wood person is so into it, they keep saying, hey, do you like it in this color? You know, and they like send another ruler. So they've got the purple version, they've got that. So to me, that's a sign that things are going well, is when something that's, again, maybe a project or a moment that's been instigated by me takes on a life of its own, right? So now the rulers are being made, and again, they have, this one doesn't, but this one has Jessica's laser cut studio name, and then the student can have their own name laser cut onto it. How much time do I have left? How many? 3? Perfect. 8. Oh, 8. Oh, I'll be done early. So just to give a little bit of kind of tying into things, this project's larger world really comes from and was instigated by this garment, which is a Qipao from my family that was made in the early 1900s in China, that was passed down to me by my Chinese family. My Chinese family immigrated to the United States in the 1860s, so they're some of the earliest immigrants to the United States. And from what I've been able to piece together, the women would always marry Chinese-born men because that gets the men access to their citizenship rights, to buy land, which you couldn't do at that time, et cetera, et cetera. My family is San Francisco, Oakland. So again, my grandmother, this was probably her mother's dress, but my grandmother went to segregated schools in Oakland, which is probably why she still spoke Chinese. I do not speak Chinese. So another piece of this larger project is really thinking about textiles and migration. And it really starts with my daughter's almost family history. I'm half white, half Chinese. My daughter is a quarter white, a quarter Chinese, and half Black. And so I brought this garment, actually 3 garments, with me as another part of this project. And so was able to go to mainland China and Taishan, where my family is sort of from. We don't know exactly where, but then my very talented former student, who was very good at taking pictures with his phone, he found this like abandoned village, and we were, being influencer-like and taking pictures. But it's been really, I think, fascinating for me to connect, again, one of the things that's so fascinating about the history of Qipao and the tailoring tradition in Taiwan is its own connection with various forms of colonialism and migration of people, and therefore ideas and politics and et cetera, which I won't go fully into, but it's fascinatingly and hugely complicated. So you get things like there's a diagram from during the Japanese occupation where the earlier versions of Qipao were more, well, you can't really see it. They were not as closely tailored as the more contemporary versions. They were more, there were no seams here and there were no darts. They were more like a bag, shall we say. And there's this Japanese colonial diagram that's instructing Taiwanese people how to modernize their garment by making it more tailored, which is just this wild, right? Because it's Western tailoring. These layers of how colonialism is being materialized and then being used as a technique of the body at the same time, with a garment that has Chinese roots, but Western, or many layers. There's with my daughters, the joke of the larger project is that all the textiles go back to China, because I started a quilt that basically uses fabrics from my Chinese family, my white family, and then for complicated reasons, there's no connection to my daughter's Black family. And the joke is all of those fabrics go back to China because the Qipao of my grandmother's, which may have been made in Taiwan, which is one reason Taiwan became an area for me of interest. She came to Taiwan in the 1970s. And so my guess is that was as close to home as she and my grandfather could get at that time. So I have a qipao from her that is now cut into little pieces as part of this quilt. With my white grandmother, it's also a Chinese garment, which again is a whole weird question. Number one of like, what is my Episcopalian blue-eyed grandmother doing with this Chinese garment? And when did she wear it in Santa Barbara? She had a room in her house that she called her opium den. So there was also the clown room for the grandchildren. That was a deeply terrifying place. And then the fabric representing Africa was almost certainly made in China, which of course is what is happening now. And there's a whole thread of this larger project that's looking at these African fabrics that are being made in China and the ways that Chinese designers are introducing Chinese aesthetic motifs into African fabric in ways that are really fascinating. Anyway, so that's sort of the larger thing. Another just small piece that I'll wrap up with is, again, sort of these design experiments that I've been doing as I very purposefully have not really written any field notes. I have been sewing my field notes. And this is a field note. And when I first arrived, it was around the Lunar New Year, and they were cleaning the studio, and you clean things out at the New Year. And this is what they were throwing away. And I said, can I have that? This giant garbage bag full of the most beautiful fabric I've ever seen. So that has sort of morphed into a set of field notes that I'm still trying to figure out exactly what they are, what they might be. But the one I'm wearing, for instance, the collar here, I didn't include the smaller picture, but it's actually a practice piece made by the apprentices that notes what the stitch is and who made it and what day it was. And this is actually Japanese fabric. So again, there's a lot of these interesting things going on about where the fabrics come from, Japanese fabric being made in this, Chinese garment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, oh yeah, and then this, I like to close with this picture because here's me not liking what I've done with my field notes and having to fix it. So that's sort of ongoing fixing. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Qing. Now it's come to our Q&A session. If you have any questions, Daniel.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. It's super interesting. Just a stupid, silly story, but like I was just at a social event and this person comes up to me and she's like, "Oh, I'm wearing a qipao." And I also have "Made in Taiwan" tatted on me in Chinese characters. And I'm like, "Oh, where are you from?" And she's like, "I'm from France." And I'm like, "Okay, that makes sense." But yeah, I was wondering like what do you make of like the status and like kind of future of Qipao? Because it's such a historical cultural item and like what is it, where do you see it kind of going from here?
Yeah, it's certainly, I went to mainland China a few times while I was here. And there's a real tension, a growing tension between Taiwan and mainland China about who claims this garment and how. That's relatively new from what I hear. I mean, it's not an issue in mainland China. They're just like, this is our thing. But there's also a lot of cosplay going on, especially in China. That's more the Hanfu stuff, but also Qipao. So you go, there are these huge kind of nostalgic shopping centers, and a lot of the shops, mostly women, but men too, you go and you get all dolled up in your historical era of choice, and then you like get your picture taken while you're like looking over the bridge or like, you know, doing these things. So there's a cosplay aspect, but then you also do see people just wearing them during the day. And there's much less of that here, much less. But for the tailors, there's also this disparagement of that. Like they're all like, well, that's Chao Bao Qipao. How about Qipao? No. So like, you know, they very much dislike the sorry, my brain is, I have COVID brain, mass-produced Qipao, right? And so there's fewer and fewer people who are interested in that discernment, I think. And so that from the tailor's point of view, that's like very sad, because, and it's also like these people have no taste. And so there's a, you know, and I think in Taiwan especially, there's a feeling that Qipao are more for a wedding or a special event, but in every day they're kind of dowdy and like not hip. But there are people who also are really into it and just wear them every day. And they're much more it's not simply cultural nostalgia, but it's more than just the clothes at the same time. So, you know, there's a real range. Yeah.
Thank you. That was amazing. I have a million questions,
So
but I'll just do one. I can buy you a cocktail and we can talk. I'm curious about the next generation of women. In terms of age range, in terms of their background with sewing or not, their stories.
Yeah.
Since you're an anthropologist, I'm sort of fascinated by that shift.
Yeah. Well, my huge barrier is that I basically don't speak Chinese. So I speak sewing, which puts me ahead of people who speak Chinese but don't sew, but I basically don't speak Chinese. So there's a few things going on. Mostly, again, the only people who apprentice are relatively well-to-do young women who can afford a year off to apprentice. Some of them are doing it like before they go to fashion school. It is part of the curriculum at some of the fashion schools here. But it's because it's not perceived and it's not really actually a way to make a living and raise a family anymore. It's not considered a viable profession. So it's much more moving into the realm of being a hobby. So this is where Jessica, in a way, comes in, where the business model then is not let me be a tailor and train apprentices, because tailors don't really view themselves as teachers. They're just like, do it, you know, or it's bad, you know. Jessica's very much a teacher. And she also has done she does things that are not traditional because it's easier for her students, et cetera, et cetera. So she's changing the tradition in that way. But in another way, she's keeping it alive by letting people, you know, learn how to make a qipao. And measure them, you know, learn some of the complexity. But it's definitely very much a dying art. Yeah. And that's true pretty much everywhere. And you know, good old capitalism, I blame them all the way. You know. I blame capitalism for pretty much everything, so including my deep unhappiness.
We can still take one question. So If anyone has any question to Dr. Chang.
Evan.
Just a very small question about, can you talk about the fabrics?
Yeah.
And the designs in particular? That one in particular makes me think of 1920s era Japanese kimono, a particular style of kimono. And maybe that one too, but I'm less convinced.
So, Yongle Market is the place where you buy the fabric here, and it's still relatively viable. So, this is Japanese fabric that I bought because I really liked it. And also because you can get Japanese fabric here a lot cheaper than you can in the United States. And it kind of reminds me of Mary Mecco. And I was like, this is going to look awesome. Woohoo. I believe this is Taiwanese made fabric, but it has clearly some like Japanese kinds of motifs going on. And one of the things that I learned along the way is that most of the former Taiwanese textile mills, because Taiwan used to have a very robust textile industry, they make socks now, which is why Taiwan has the best socks. Like, I am a major sock person, and I have bought so many socks since I have been here. There's a sock museum. Yes. Best socks anywhere. Anyway, but the fabrics are really fascinating because in Master Liu's shop, he takes pictures of everything he makes. And many of the Qipao are in fact made out of kimono fabric. And they have to be constructed slightly differently because the fabric is not wide enough. So they have a seam here down the middle. And sometimes it's a deconstructed kimono, and sometimes it's just on the roll that somebody had that they've had for a long time and they want. So it's that, and there's no sense of that's not appropriate. So they're very agnostic about where the fabric comes from, and sometimes they use, I don't know, it probably doesn't happen that much anymore, but there was a group of like women who were the wives of diplomats, and they would go somewhere and they would buy fabric from that place and then get like all matching dresses made. And, and so there's some from like Uzbekistan, and and so you see the pictures of those Qipao. So yeah. But there's a whole world in there. That's what we do. Like, we find worlds and everything. But so this is a small gift to the office. The rosewood ruler.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Chang. And so we are going to welcome our next presenter, Dr. Evan Dawley, for his final presentation. Yes, please.
Is that possible to the presenter's view? Yeah. Slideshow doesn't have it. Don't worry about it. Then go back to just go to the regular one. Cool. That's why. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. I'm really glad to get a chance to share a little bit of my research. I'm not going to talk about my process as much as Elizabeth did, because it's really kind of a dull process by comparison. I, open up a digitized document, fight with the characters for a while, the unpunctuated handwritten characters, decide that I've gotten it well enough and move on to the next one. So that's the process of doing the research. So this project, it's an idea that I sort of began thinking about I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Originally, I was just going to look at the activities of the Overseas Chinese Affairs Commission, the Qiaowu Weiwei. But it has, as you can see by the title, morphed into a study of nationalism and the formation of the nation state. So when I began this research in the fall and at the mid-year conference, these were the questions that I was asking. 3 questions. And these were the answers that I had back in January. And those of you who were there in January will remember that I also ended with a 4th question, which was that. I didn't really know what any of the research meant. I had gathered a bunch of stuff. I had read a lot of documents, but I didn't really know what to do with it all as yet. So since then, I've thought a lot about what all of this information means. And in the process of thinking about that, I've been inspired by the work of Partha Chatterjee, who, this is now a 30-year-old book, I think, called The Nation and Its Fragments. And this was one of Chatterjee's arguments about what people who study nationalism and the nation state should have in mind as they're considering its formation. And so still, right, so what? Why is this important? Well, so I think that Chatterjee's point reminds us of several things. One, that the connections between the state, the nation, and the people are not predetermined. They are not fixed. They are not unchanging over time. They actually have to be forged, maintained, and then reformulated over time. And to me, this seems to be a particularly important point at this moment in history, when nation states are tearing themselves apart from within, or are deciding that ideas like national sovereignty are maybe less important to acknowledge. So thinking about where nation states come from, and as his title suggests, its fragments, is kind of important. So these points have been really helpful for me to think about the research I've been doing, to think about the documents I've been reading, mostly from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of China, as evidence of the Republic of China government trying to work out the relationships between the state, the nation, and its people. So let me turn next to my case studies, or the first case study, which I did mention in January, the Haiphong incident that took place in northern Vietnam, the port city of Haiphong in 1927. So in 1927, well, there was a lot going on for the KMT and the Republic of China. It was facing a lot of challenges, shall we say. It was in the midst of the Northern Expedition, trying to reunify all of what had been Qing territory, fighting against a lot of different warlord governments that were trying to prevent that. It established its capital in Nanjing early in the year, and then rapidly cut ties with its Chinese Communist Party allies and purged them from its ranks. Internationally, it was also trying to renegotiate the unequal treaties that China had lived under since the middle of the 19th century. So it faced a lot of challenges. And in the midst of all of those challenges, on August 17th, in the streets of Haiphong, an overseas Chinese woman and a Vietnamese woman got into an argument over access to a public water faucet. And their allies gathered, and pretty quickly violence erupted in the streets and rampaged through the city for about 10 days. A few deaths, dozens of injuries, hundreds of thousands of UN and property damage was done, a lot of arrests, mostly of Vietnamese, some of overseas Chinese. Now, jumping over a lot of details, because, well, I don't want to get too far into the weeds. I instead want to talk about this incident in terms of what I think the government tried to do with it, which was tried to build a national diaspora through this incident. And I come to that through a few different ways. One is the terminology that the government officials used in describing these people living in Vietnam. They used the term Chao Bao. Is this a, well, anyway, Chao Bao, which is a term that connotes kinship, right? The idea is you come out of the same womb. The people in Vietnam were of the same natal descent. The other term that was used a lot was Chao Min, which translates roughly as overseas people, but the idea really is that they're citizens. They're Min. They're not Ren. They're Min. They're inside. And these two terms suggest that the people who are living outside of China were no different than those living within China, except that they were just temporarily overseas. And that also comes out of this third term, right? Both of the Qiaobao, the Qiaomin, are related to Huaqiao, which was a slightly older term, maybe in the 1920s, that referred to an incredibly large population, maybe 10 million people, I think, around that time, scattered around the globe. Their ancestors or they themselves had left China at very different times, for very different reasons, for very different destinations. So this was not a unified population. However, through incidents like the Haiphong incident, the government tried to merge them into a single united population that had a sense of loyalty to the Republic of China. Another way in which official documents made this point was by referencing other aspects or other incidents of anti-Chinese violence that were breaking out in Southeast Asia at this point. They referred to attacks in the Dutch East Indies, in Singapore, and in Borneo, and really tried to present them all as part of the same thing affecting the entire common family. And in sort of, again, attempting to build a single national diaspora out of this diverse population, one of the main tools was the practice of protecting the Qiaobao, or Bao Qiao, as the term appears again and again. And in the course of its negotiations with French officials in colonial Vietnam and in Paris, ROC officials repeatedly made this list of demands to try and protect their claimed citizens abroad. This last one I always thought is kind of curious. The Republic of China, of course, in 1927 had no diplomatic representation because, or the KMT, sorry, had no diplomatic representation anywhere in the world, really, because it wasn't the government yet. However, they tried to use this incident to establish diplomatic relations and eventually succeeded in 1935. That 1935 suggests that negotiations around this incident went on for a long time. And aspects of it remained unresolved when the Japanese invaded in July of 1937. So that's sort of where that incident ends. And so I jump ahead to the post-war period, when again, the Republic of China was a very contested state, if you will. It faced a very long list of challenges as it emerged from World War II, trying to reestablish control over areas the Japanese had occupied or the communist forces had held, rebuilding the infrastructure, the government, the economy, and then, of course, rapidly descending into civil war with the communist antagonists. And by 1949, of course, the ROC, the KMT version of the ROC, had lost almost all of that territory and almost all of the population that it claimed as national citizens. So all of these were existential challenges to its vision of what China was. We're happy we're here on Taiwan, don't get me wrong. So in the midst of these challenges, another challenge that it faced was trying to apply ROC nationality to a particular population, the Tai Chiao, the overseas Taiwanese. These are people who, up until 1945, had been Japanese colonial subjects, and they were now found primarily in Japan, but scattered around China and Southeast Asia as well, as Mike knows. So in trying to extend citizenship to these people, the ROC, by using this term Tai Chiao, created what I call a nationality gap. This nationality gap had really two pieces to it. One was the mere fact that they were referred to as Tai Chiao instead of regular Hua Chiao. Right? So they created this separate category for these new citizens. The other issue was that, or another issue, was that there was a difference between what the ROC wanted to achieve in terms of applying citizenship and what others would accept in terms of the citizenship of these people. And so what I mean by that, the nationality gap in practice, so there was resistance among the Tai Chiao themselves. And this is somewhat evident in the documents that I've read, particularly as the economic situation in Taiwan deteriorated in 1946 and then exploded in the 228 incident in 1947. more than a few Taichiao were not really all that interested in being ROC citizens, and some sought refuge in Japan in 47 and 48. The other form of resistance I found was from other governments. So the Republic of China claimed that all Taiwanese, be they in Taiwan or outside of Taiwan, recovered ROC nationality on October 25th, 1945, retrocession day. And that was an automatic thing. But the governments that they dealt with didn't agree that this was an automatic process, right? The British government, the American government said, will acknowledge that Taiwan came under ROC administration under the terms of the Cairo Declaration, Cairo Conference, but citizenship questions have to await a treaty between the Republic of China and Japan. So things were in limbo in that regard for several years. And in all of that, another incident occurred, the Shibuya incident of July 1946, which became another opportunity for nation building through the diaspora. How much time do I have? Okay, good. So post-war Tokyo was kind of a hard place to live after the Allied bombing of the city. And in trying to survive, a number of Taiwanese merchants rented some land from an organization called the Matsudagumi. And the Matsudagumi criminal organization demanded those lands back as early as March 1946. The Taiwanese refused. They had leases, and this should be respected. Tensions rose between the merchants and the Matsudagumi. There were minor clashes in the middle of July, and then on July 19th, some ROC officials had sort of stepped in to try to essentially talk the Taiwanese down from going to fight with the Matsudagumi and its ruffians. At least this is what the documents say. And were escorting them home to where they lived outside of, I think I missed, well, anyway, I was supposed to have a map of Tokyo up there, my bad. Escorting them to where they were living outside of the city, passing by Shibuya Station where the Japanese had set up a police checkpoint. They halted the trucks, shots were fired, deaths ensued, and injuries. A number of arrests were made. This time, about 43 Taiwanese were arrested. Ultimately, 3 Japanese were tried. And in the process of what ensued thereafter, once again, the Republic of China government did its best to protect its claimed citizens abroad. It tried to ensure that they received a fair trial, that they had good legal representation, that there would be a Chinese judge involved in the tribunal that would judge their cases, and that they would be essentially treated as if they were Chinese citizens. It was, I think, an example of unsuccessful incorporation of this population, partly because the verdicts didn't go in their favor. Out of those originally about 41, 38 were tried, 36 were convicted and deported to Taiwan sometime after January of 1947. I haven't actually been able to figure out the exact date. But if it happened quickly, well, they walked back into the 228 incident. The other issue, and the more important issue, I think, is that throughout the documents, these and other ones from this period of time, the Republic of China government was really ambivalent towards these Taiwanese, towards these Taichiao. It was claiming them as national citizens. It was trying to protect them in some ways, but also kind of blamed them for their own problems as engaging in criminal activity and other issues. So this brings me to my conclusions at this point. What have I learned about ROC national reconstruction in this period of time over the course of this past year? Well, creating the national diaspora really is an essential piece of nation building, especially when a state is so deeply contested domestically and internationally. The domestic problems sort of make it look outside to seek legitimacy, and the international challenges sort of force it to develop its legitimacy through diplomacy. So the national diaspora was a key part of that, I think. Second, assertion of citizenship doesn't equal incorporation. You can't just tell someone they're a citizen. There's many areas of resistance, especially, again, in cases of contested legitimacy. And in these cases, we can see the cracks within the nation, right? The cracks between the state and the nation and the people. And so that's most of the research talk. What else have I been doing? I was asked to talk about what else I've been doing. So at the very beginning of the year, I said that one of my goals, why are the pictures not showing up? Oh, well. One of my goals for the year was to complete a series of hikes that is called the Taipei Skyline Trail. Circuit that goes around the city, mostly through New Taipei City. This was, as it says, an incomplete endeavor. There were too many rainy weekends in the spring, and I did a lot of it, but I've got like 5 or 6 sections left. So I don't think I'm going to get those done in the heat of the summer. What can you do? I gave a whole lot of talks. Some thanks to a host at NTU, one in Seoul, one in Tokyo, one still upcoming, July 9th, Academia Sinica, which will be a much longer version of what you've just heard, if you want more, the Institute of Taiwan History. In addition, I finished a book. So this was not in my Fulbright application, but I did use time while I worked on this. It will be out in the spring of 2026 with Reaction Books, so be sure to get many copies. I ate finally a picture, good. Not only at night markets, but frequently at night markets. And I wandered. Linda, I was impressed with your map from last week, so I made one of all the places that I went to in Taiwan and wandered in Taipei and in all of these other locations. And then some thanks, obviously, to the Fulbright program, without whom none of this would have been possible. Fulbright program both here and more broadly, thanks to my host at the Institute of Taiwan History at Academia Sinica, and to my host at NTU through the Yingshi Yu International Center of History and Chinese Humanities. Sorry, the name is a mouthful, I always have to look, and the Department of History for hosting me, particularly last fall. If others are looking for a good fellowship for 4 months in Taiwan, this is a good one. And then finally, and most importantly, my thanks to the Taiwan mango and mango shaved ice. I had to wait almost the entire fellowship year for it to hit mango season, but this really got me through the whole time. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Dawley. Now it's come to our Q&A session. If you have any question, please feel free to ask Dr. Dawley.
Thanks so much for that presentation. A high recommendation for Snow Bros, 学人兄弟, is really good mango shaved ice. Fantastic. Multiple locations throughout the city. I have many questions also, but I'll ask this one. Your selection of the cases makes it such that the KMT, before they moved to Taiwan, claimed diaspora citizens of mainland China, and then after they moved to Taiwan, were claiming Taiwanese diasporas.
Right. Okay.
And I'm wondering what they did before that about Taiwanese diasporas, and after that of the mainland Chinese diasporas, and also conversely what the CCP was doing. Did they also try to curry favor with different types of people as to the identities over that time?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of answers to that. One, obviously, this is only a small portion of the research. There's a bunch of other research I've done about or relations with British colonial Malaya in particular from the 20s into the 50s. And those are all Huaqiao, not Taiqiao. So the ROC continued to try to claim the people with mainland descent even after 1945. Before 1945, well, Mike is the real expert on this, but they did very little. They expressed almost no interest in the Taiwanese as they were Japanese subjects. They did not try to claim those people when they went abroad or when they were in Taiwan. They set up a consulate in Taipei in 1927, 28, and established overseas Chinese associations in a couple of cities in Taiwan for the mainlanders who were going to Taiwan. So they really the ROC government really viewed the Taiwanese as not Chinese until very, very late, until maybe as late as 1942, 43, 44. I'm relying on Mike's article, so he's the one who can answer this question better. There was popular discourse in some Chinese cities that was more interested in Taiwan than the government was, but the government was pretty separate. After the war, I haven't gotten really into the period where there is a PRC, but I do know that there was contestation between the two governments over the broader overseas Chinese population. And that in that construction, they included the overseas Taiwanese. And so that competition happened in Japan, in Southeast Asia, in the United States, certainly by the 50s and 60s. Yeah. But I haven't really gotten beyond early 1950s.
Okay, so I'm really curious if in your archival research, you found that the KMT government thought of itself or thought of these overseas Chinese and talked about them in ways that were different than how they talked about in sort of a public-facing capacity, or whether those two things were rather congruent.
That's a good question. And as you know, whenever somebody says that's a good question, it means they don't have an answer. I haven't actually looked a lot at the public statements. I've been looking all at internal materials. So in terms of relations between ROC officials and Chinese diaspora, Huaqiao and Taiqiao, there are examples in the documents of sort of interactions, discussion of interactions, and in those cases, there seems to be there seems to be conversation about this population as a uniform population. Yeah. But yeah, no, I haven't really looked into public pronouncements. I will now do that.
Okay. Yeah, I have a bad question. I'm hoping you have an answer. Okay. So you talk quite a lot about the state intention. So I was wondering how those Taiqiao people they react to this narrative. Do they call themselves as Taiqiao, or they come up with some different narratives?
So the best example that I have to give an answer to your question is that immediately after the war, the Taiqiao in Japan, I mean, I'll call them Taiqiao, but they didn't call themselves that. There's what I found a report from an organization, I think calling itself the Overseas Formosans Association in the English translation, that on the one hand said, we're happy to be part of China. We want to be treated as Chinese citizens again. But we also want very special and particular things from Japan that other Chinese don't deserve because we were colonized by Japan. And so they were also like separating themselves out as different than other Huaqiao. Sort of the future prospect of my research, when I look a little bit more at Japan and the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, I'm going to be focusing in particular on the Taiwan independence movement. And so those are people who very definitely did not consider themselves a part of China. But that will be a particular population.
Okay, that was our last question. And thank you very much, everyone, for raising those amazing questions. And thank you very much, Dr. Dawley. And now we are going to have a coffee break. Yes. Yes. Okay. At the meantime, so we're going to see you back at 6:35. which 我们现在几点？ Okay, 2:45. We're going to have a 10-minute break. Okay. Hello everyone. So our next session is going to start right now. I'm very honored to be able to welcome our next presenter, Mr. Daniel Tai, to present like what has he been through like during the past months in Taiwan. Let's welcome Mr. Daniel Tai.
All right. Hey everyone. Thanks for coming today. So yeah, this past year in Taiwan has been really wonderful. I had been thinking about Taiwan for like since the start of my PhD program. But for the first like 3 years in the program, I was kind of just like wandering around, not really sure what to do because I couldn't get to Taiwan. But then this past year has been so productive to just like brainstorm and think. So yeah, thank you, Fulbright, for giving me this opportunity to just come here, enjoy the hot springs in Taiwan, and just sit there in the hot water and think. Um, so yeah, my project is thinking about crafting a global Taiwan, cultivating international student workers for a globalizing Taiwan. And so very recently, there's been a lot of news reports coming out about how these students from Southeast Asia are doubling as a sort of cheap labor. They basically do the same work as migrant workers, and a lot of them are overseas Chinese in this like sort of 3+4 or yeah 3+4 产学合作, and it's basically using like they're granting internships to the students while they get their studies, but the students actually end up on the same factory lines as a lot of migrant workers, and so this has kind of blown up in terms of like the students are kind of going through this labor exploitation. This is horrible. Um, and so there's this prevailing narrative of how these overseas Chinese are being funneled into these trade schools to act as another source of labor. And the primary reasons that are given is because, you know, the demographic crisis is creating declining domestic labor force. Not enough Taiwanese people are working in these factories. Also, private universities have declining enrollments. And so this is a sort of like win-win for industry and academia, where they can both like increase their enrollments and labor force. And the way that like people can think about this is that Japan has a very, very similar program in the sense that they have international Chinese students go to Japan, attend their language schools, but actually work in the same service industry jobs that are, super low wage. And they call this like side door migration. And I don't think this isn't wrong in any sense. Certainly, a lot of students end up in these situations, and they are working in the service and hospitality industry. But I think that this is only scratching the like underbelly of this industry academic collaboration programs. I think once we like start questioning more of this program, I think that it reveals that there is something more to this. So I think the first question is really, why would they look to hire students as opposed to more migrant workers to fill in this like labor need? The operators in these semiconductors in these semiconductor factories are almost all Filipino migrant workers. So then why are now Vietnamese, Thai, Indonesian students also being incorporated into this? And then another point is this issue of skill. I think that the articles that have been written so far have been really focusing on the low skill wage and low wage wage market. But then at the same time, there's also this really big push for, increasing skill in terms of mid-skill and high-skill technical training, in terms of like printed circuit boards at Longhua, AI, satellite antennas, renewable energy. And so there are these two questions that remain, I think, for these international students and their experience in Taiwan. And so I think that sort of argument that I'm trying to like make with this is that, this is actually a case of the developmental state trying to go global. And so Wu Jianmin at Academia Sinica, he breaks up this like period of Taiwan into these three geopolitical moments. The first being Korean War, with the U.S. basically assuring Taiwan's safety and granting military aid. The second cycle then being Taiwan being, excluded from the international system through the Shanghai Communique. But then even within this time, Taiwan and China's relationships begins to thaw, and Taiwan becomes much more China-facing in terms of, the Taisang going over to China and establishing all these industries in China and allowing for China's ascendancy in terms of economic power. But then in the third cycle, what we're currently at and what I'm really focusing on is that U.S.-China rivalry is now creating the situation for Taiwan where Taiwan supply chains have to decouple from China and move into Southeast Asia. And that's now creating the situation where Taiwan really has to look outward to deal with the sort of geopolitical moment of the present day. And so, just these are some graphs and statistics of just showing how the investment is moving towards Southeast Asia and South Asia way more as part of this global supply chain. And so there's this macro factor of this, as along with the geopolitical factor of China pressuring Taiwan or competing with Taiwan to actually get these investments. And Taiwan is also really interested in and has this program and history of attracting young tech hopefuls to come to Taiwan. And so the developmental state idea is really showing up in these sort of current National Development Council ideas, right? They're pushing out these key talent cultivation and recruitment programs, and the idea is to make this Taiwan into a global talent hub. And they're really, really focused on cooperating with enterprises as a classic developmental state strategy to expand Taiwan's industrial sector and allow for it to grow. And so adding on to this is the current plan where they want to cultivate more than 450,000 AI and other human-centered digital talents and STEM cross-field talents. And almost half of that is being drawn from developing these foreign students. And I think the government also has this has a sort of plan to want to retain talent in Taiwan to deal with the domestic skill shortage and labor shortages. But they've expanded the sort of retainment policies and whatnot. But to a certain extent, that's the explicit outward saying program. But then in reality, it seems like they're actually working really closely with industry to allow for the sort of talent to be geared towards that overseas market, or even going back to their home country to work in Taiwanese factories. And so one of the programs that I'm really focusing in on is called the Xingxing Zuanban, which is the intense program. And so you can already see in the first point, it's really guided by the needs of enterprises and industry. And so this is a scholarship that offers brand new scholarship pretty much that offers students a stipend as well as living costs and airfare. And you can see at the bottom here, they're very emphasizing this obligation to stay in Taiwan for 2 years to work. However, after getting a lot of feedback from industry, they're also realizing now that a lot of these enterprises actually want these students to pretty much just go abroad for employment afterwards once they finish their graduation. And so they create this sort of new funding pattern, which is where the enterprises can just fund the student entirely and they can be sent immediately to the overseas base. And so there are 4 universities in Taiwan that are really leading the charge in terms of recruiting. They have their own recruitment bases in respective countries. So Changshu is in Indonesia, National Pingtung University of Science and Tech is in Thailand. National Chongqing University this year became the head for the Philippines. Before it was Kunshan University. And then UST in Taipei is managing Vietnam, but before it used to be Mingxin. So there's actually this sort of shift from very clear private universities to the sort of outward facing best public universities in Taiwan managing the sort of technical trade program. And so there's several empirical puzzles that I'm really curious about here. The first is really that, you know, historically, Taiwan has been really focused on bringing their diasporic ties. They've been focusing on overseas Chinese, and a lot of the international students used to be from China itself. But then, you know, after this geopolitical moment now, Taiwan has to deal with a sort of, you know, movement towards Southeast Asia. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of international students directly come from Southeast Asia. And so, yeah, there's this diversification alongside the supply chain for these educational students to come from other places beyond China. There's also an expansion from, you know, the low-wage service sector and hospitality sector to more like mid and high skill education and labor. So like these students are in like electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. They're working on like, you know, circuit boards that are like pretty advanced. And so another empirical curiosity is that this is a really governmental top-down, explicit, and targeted program. And so, you know, in Japan's case, this was a sort of side door migration where students could come to study Japanese, but then now the government is actually like, no, we want these students to come here for study and work. And so there's this question of like, why are we bringing international students to Taiwan to train, and then where are these students actually going after? You know, are they staying in Taiwan, or do they want to stay in Taiwan, or are they going back to their home country? I'm engaging with 3 different literatures for theoretically to like guide this process, and the first part is migration literature. That's where, you know, I kind of grew up in sociology, and so the first is like, you know, migration scholars have always thought about skilled migration as a sort of state needing to manage brain drain and brain gain, meaning like, you know, if a lot of your domestic population who's skilled leaves, like in Taiwan's case, then there's a sort of brain drain. But then Taiwan actually represented this case of circulation because a lot of Taiwanese came back to Taiwan to develop the semiconductor industry. And so the literature has been really focused on how the state manages their domestic population, alongside a sort of and you know, they'll think about the foreign population as a sort of brain gain if they successfully attract talent from other countries. But the issue is that what I'm actually seeing is that, you know, these industries are really interested in sending these students back to their home countries. And so this theory can't really explain and categorize situations in which the state is interested in recruiting and training foreign talent in Taiwan to then send them back to their overseas industries. My professor, Hernandez Leon, he came up with this migration industry idea, and he's really showing that there are these brokers that these for-profit brokers that feel increase the migration process. And so for migrant workers, you know, we there's a lot of literature on the migrant broker system, but educational institutions, whether they're public or private, hasn't been looked at because, you know, this phenomenon is only, you know, starting to happen over the past like 20, 30 years. And so it's interesting to see how educational institutions, and it's literally just like professors, how do they act as intermediaries similarly or different from these for-profit migrant brokers? And I think the biggest literature that I want to dive into is the developmental state. And so traditionally, the developmental state has been the idea that, you know, a state is territorially bounded and it's very focused on domestic industrial growth. And the state has to have a sort of interdependent relationship with its industry in order for it to be successful, to catch up with the Western powers. And Taiwan, you know, captures the perfect developmental state. And so there's a sort of legacy of this developmental state showing up even now, even after, you know, Taiwan has become this sort of middle power. But what it fails to do is think about how the developmental state actually goes global and actually manages to deal with the global issues of, you know, these supply chains moving around, and how does the state then go along with these sort of like trade missions abroad to manage this industry, to manage the industry needs and feed and fulfill those needs. And lastly, the education literature, there's a lot on the neoliberalization of education. And so in Taiwan, with a lot of these private universities, they need students. And so there's this corporatization and commodification of education. But the focus on the neoliberalization of it is definitely right, but it can overemphasize the lack of the state in this. And so in my case, I'm really seeing how the state is cooperating with academia and industry to manage and create these scholarship programs for these international students. And so theoretically, I'm really interested in this large question of how does a state with limited international recognition go global? And my 3 research questions, by focusing in on the sort of Zuanban, which is like these special programs for international students, as well as overseas students, I'm really interested in what and who is driving Taiwan's foreign recruitment for skilled student workers. This is a industry and academia project. And so it's a sort of chicken and egg problem. Like, what is driving who is getting this certain student? Is it industry being like, we're establishing factories in Thailand, and so Longhua, we need you to recruit Thai students? Or is it that the universities already had this sort of like long-lasting history of recruiting from Thailand, and then the industries are now going to Thailand because of that? And I think that on this level, I think I'm also really interested in like the sort of geopolitical factors that are shaping this. And so, Taiwan is also competing with China, Japan, South Korea for the same students. So actually, like, I had an interview with a Thai student very recently who's working at this pretty much the best printed circuit board company. And I asked him, like, okay, when you were thinking about coming to Taiwan, like, why did you end up choosing Taiwan? Were you thinking about anywhere else? And he said, yeah, it was offered that he could go to China to work on the high-speed rail, or come to Taiwan to do engineering and do printed circuit boards. And he said that he ended up choosing Taiwan because in China, it was going to be a 5-year program where the first year is learning Chinese and the next 4 years is doing school, but the whole entire time you can't work. But in Taiwan, there is that work option. So he can gain that sort of experience in this industry. And he also knew that a bunch of his school principal was telling him that Taiwanese factories were moving into Thailand. And so this is like a great opportunity to secure a job in Thailand, working at this Taiwanese company. And the second main question that I'm interested in is, why are there these 4 universities all focusing on different Southeast Asian countries? There's not really overlap. And so I'm really interested in that variation. Like, where are they funneling these students by nationality? And yeah, what are the strategies and rationales for these professors, these education and like Office of International Admissions and Affairs? How are they mediating this relationship between industry and the workers? And lastly, classic sociologist question, understanding bottom up, like, what are these student workers' perceptions and experiences of this seemingly circular study to work migration pipeline? So I'm hoping that this is going to be the development of my dissertation chapters. Starting in late August, they're going to go on this recruitment mission. Taiwanese government, along with industry and academia, they're going to go on this recruitment mission to Thailand. And so I got permission to just tag along. And so I'll just be tagging along with them, going to Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and just seeing ethnographically, like, how are they marketing Taiwan? How do they talk about this? What kind of jobs are they offering? And yeah, are these jobs actually being focused in those countries, or are they really needing them in Taiwan? And of course, that's also going to be a great spot to talk to the students and really capture that power competition between, when do these students decide to go to Taiwan versus China or Japan or Korea? And so, yeah, that's my project. I mean, in terms of like things I've been doing in Taiwan, I like a couple of weeks ago, I climbed Jiaming Lake, which was so tough, but like amazing. my favorite town is Chishang. I just love their bento boxes, and yeah, I spent like a day before going to Jiaming Lake, just like sitting outside looking at the rice fields. Yeah, I've been doing art in Taiwan too, like with printmaking, and that's been super awesome. But yeah, Taiwan has been so wonderful to me. I'll be here for another year, so it's gonna be good. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So now it's our Q&A time. So if you have any questions, okay, Dr. Dawley.
You, right. Obviously, it's great that we're in one after the other, so we're doing some similar things. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of the OCAC as an intermediary, and also do you have a sense of whether or not it has its own agendas?
Yeah.
In this process?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I mean, the OCAC, just a sociological understanding of the state is that like the state is not homogenous, right? Like they all have their own interests. The Ministry of Labor, National Immigration Agency, Ministry of Education, even the National Development Council and the OCAC, they all have like their own interests. But yeah, I'm getting to the state interviews, so that's still something I need to do. But yeah, that's what I'm expecting. Like the OCAC definitely has its own interests. But it's interesting because it's kind of running alongside the sort of Ministry of Education Department of Technological and Vocational Education. Like that's becoming like the main implementer of the Ministry of Education for these programs because it's shifting away from Huachao. And so, yeah, I don't know. I also, the same Thai student that I talked about just now, he's there on this thing called like the Huaqing, which is basically he gets like a kind of tuition supplement of like 20,000 to just like cut out the costs. He was just like, yeah, I'm actually not like watch out. They just thought that like since I'm from central Thailand, like I'm just watch out. So like yeah, but yeah, it's interesting seeing those dynamics happen where even the OCAC, they're not even I don't even think fully sure about what watch out is anymore. And yeah, it's kind of strange how they do it, but definitely something more to investigate.
So does anyone has another question for Daniel? Okay.
Thanks so much for this. I have a question that may be beyond your project, but just asking you for some reflections. Right now in the US, there's such a push to push out international students. And I suppose the logic behind that is that somehow these international students are exploiting their host country and taking advantage of extra resources that the home country should reserve for their own students. But you are arguing in a way the converse, which is how the host country for international students can exploit international students. And so I'm wondering if you could kind of dialogue between these two opposing perceptions of the role and identity of international students and of course, the two countries' policies towards their international students are also very different. But in this kind of era where it's so contested just to be out of your own country studying, where's the future for students in terms of where they go and whether they're manipulated or manipulating the host?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening in the US. But I think the sort of difference is that, you know, Taiwan traditionally has not been this sort of center for international education that the US has been. And, the US is now progressing towards this like isolationist approach, whereas Taiwan is in this like moment where it is really in need of sort of creating these sort of, bridges and ties with like other countries. And so I think that Taiwan, it is using these sort of like international students not only as this pure like industrial expansion into Thailand and whatnot, but they're also being used as these sort of diplomatic tools to be seen as like, yeah, we're providing them with like such a great training to then, do whatever they want. And it's tough to say, but I mean, I think that like the international students themselves, like that is like a really important story because I still don't fully know how to deal with the sort of like, you know, if this was like a Taiwanese student that wants to go and work in the industry because they need money, and like a foreign student also has that desire, why should they be like forbidden from like being allowed to work, especially if they have that desire? And obviously like the work conditions are horrible and that should be changed. But like, I don't know. I think there's a sort of like agency of the students that I want to respect, but also trying to critique the sort of like broader developmental state ideology that's being imposed so like harshly down. And it's also so fueled by like, industry expansion of global capitalism. So yeah.
We're checking last question. Okay.
So I think I made a similar point at your last presentation, but it just screamed out at me again that it feels like this project has in some ways a lot to do with territorialization. And so I was curious, it seems like one of the arguments that you're making here is for the deterritorialization of the nation state, that the physical boundaries of Taiwan are becoming less and less important. But I was curious if there's also ways that you've found re-territorialization happening in some ways, that there's new territories, new physical locations that are becoming more important than like nation state boundaries now.
Yeah. I'm gonna echo Evan on this. That's a great question. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. This is tough because it's the sort of thing of, like obviously I don't think Taiwan's borders are like disappearing. I think that they're like they're constantly being infringed upon by China, and so territories like the territorial border is very, very clear. But yeah, when it shows up in the international students themselves, yeah, like it just I don't think that it makes the sort of I don't think it fully becomes deterritorialization, because I think that like it's still that these industries, yeah, they create this managerial class of international students to then work in these industries, but that growth is eventually going back into Taiwan. And so yeah, maybe that's a way that like it's to strengthen the sort of economic project of Taiwan, and get more weapons, get better F-16s or whatever from the U.S. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I mean, I'm all for borders not existing, but like I don't think that's a reality that we can deal with.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. Let's give him some applause. So next up, we would like to invite Dr. Stephen Parker to join us for his presentation. And
this is just the way. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Parker. I'd like to start out by, of course, thanking Fulbright. I was thinking about this earlier. It was 20 years ago this year that I was a Fulbright Fellow in Germany, and it really changed my life. And I'm really grateful for that experience and also for this experience. I'm only 3 months into this experience, but luckily here I've been able to be joined by my family, and along with the sort of artistic transformation I've had here thus far, my family has also really benefited from being here culturally. So I'm very grateful to everyone here at Fulbright and to National Taiwan University for supporting this project. Before I get into the things that I've been doing here, I thought it'd be useful to just kind of provide some context for my past work. I'm an artist. I'm trained as a musician. I do work sort of at the intersection of sculpture and sound and performance. I often create different types of sculptures or structures that facilitate performances with the public. These function as sort of abstract compositions that are sometimes ongoing, and they invite viewers to become performers in these situations. The first one I wanted to show you is a piece called Batman. This is a piece for 1.5 million bats under the Congress Street Bridge, along with a community megaphone choir and handmade echolocation devices. Just one snippet. It's one snippet. Sorry. Ooh. Is this thing on? This piece is called Sonic Meditation for Solar Performer. This is a piece that's realized by a viewer who's reading a silent meditation. So in a way, they're realizing a composition in their own mind. And while that's happening, they're wearing an EEG device that is tracking changes in their brain activity, which is translated into a musical composition that's played through these instruments, reconfigured instruments that are hanging throughout the gallery. So here, I've been here for about 3 months, and now I'm going to talk through a few sort of emerging themes in my research, and hopefully that provides some context for what I'm going to be talking about, because it's been fairly scattered, and now it's starting to coalesce around an exhibition that I'll sort of summarize towards the end. One of the instruments that really attracted me to Taiwan in the first place was the sheng. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a very old instrument, and it's very unique, both in terms of its let's say sonic color. It's almost kind of bridges the gap, even though it's quite old, kind of bridges the gap between acoustic instrument and also electronic instrument. It sounds very otherworldly. It's also able to produce more than one tone at once, which is very unique for a wind instrument, and also functions in an interesting way, which I'll get to in a second. Sort of metaphorically, it's also very interesting because it's inspired by the legend of the phoenix. And its form, physical form, is supposed to represent the wings of the phoenix, and its sound is supposed to be evocative of some of those themes related to that myth. Functionally, it's a free reed instrument. So there's a series of bamboo pipes that each have their own unique reed within it. And these reeds are unique because they work both through both sort of patterns of breath, both exhaling and inhaling through the instrument. And it also enables polyphony, meaning two notes at once. And that in turn enables what are called resultant tones. When you have sort of layers of spectrums of sound and like harmonically rich sounds and you combine them, they often reveal different textures and additional tones. So, probably like one example of this would be like Tuvan throat singing, where a Tuvan throat singer is singing a fundamental pitch, but they're able to manipulate the formants above that fundamental. Similarly, with the Shang, you can manipulate some of these overtones in very interesting ways, which sort of evokes, in a way, synthetic sounds of analog synth things. So I want to just, without talking about it further, I want to just kind of demonstrate a few performers, friends of mine that I've met here, who are virtuoso Shang players. That's Li Chenli performing with a hologram of herself. This is Qipao Yang. So the second sort of area of my curiosity and interest has been tree frogs. Undoubtedly, you've heard them here. They're quite loud. Taiwan is home to the largest number of species of tree frogs. What I find, I mean, I find them like sonically very interesting, but also their use of instruments. They use resonators to amplify their voices and to outcompete one another. So this is drains nearby the hotel where we live. They also utilize like different sort of crevices and even bamboo. Another interesting thing about these tree frogs is they use phasing to stand out from one another. They don't perform in unison. They try to stagger their sounds, and this is kind of interesting when you encounter it because it's a shifting phase pattern, which is not unlike some of the phase shifts you encounter in Minmos music. And I thought a good way of demonstrating that or illustrating that would be to show you this piece called Clapping Music by Steve Reich. It's a simple pattern that is played by two people. The pattern is this. So it's a loop that is repeated over many, many times. And every 4 iterations of that loop, it's shifted by 1/8 note forward. So it creates these interesting interlocking patterns. Oops. I guess it's not going to work this time, but I'll send you a link. Hopefully this video works. Thinking through sort of applications of some of these ideas, especially like frogs and their the way that they utilize resonant bodies to amplify their voices. I've also been experimenting in the studio with using field recordings of frogs and using what are called transducer speakers, which essentially they're small, unique speakers that turn any sort of resonant surface into a speaker. So if you had like a drum, for example, you could attach this transducer speaker onto that. And I've been experimenting with other found instruments here. It's a little subtle, but it's happening. And sort of like the third area of research has been a lot of work in the field. I've been visiting a lot of recycling centers, flea markets, people on Facebook Marketplace. Here's another location in Taiwan. And also some of these recycling centers, automotive recycling centers, and then sort of observing these sort of impromptu installations and collections they've been making. I've managed to find some instruments. Here are a couple of shungs, a shung and a dashung, a few stringed instruments. Then I've also been working extensively with the different musicians and improvised music musicians I've met along the way and performing concerts and workshops. And I've really enjoyed that exchange, and also doing studio visits with different curators at my studio. So all of this is sort of coalescing around an exhibition which is going to be happening towards the end of the summer in August. It's going to be an exhibition that features a number of these found, decommissioned, broken instruments that I've accumulated over the past 3 months. Also with a lot of dead vegetation and other sort of motors I've found at flea markets and things, interspersed with field recordings of type A tree frogs. And it's going to be a composition that is sort of realized by both viewers and also local musicians here. I'm still kind of like teasing out some of the themes that I'm looking at, but exploring themes of rebirth, sort of a requiem of sorts, and other sort of like themes of like communal listening. And there's going to be a future exhibition at C-Lab, which is also in Taipei. So here's a quick video of my studio in progress, which will kind of give you a sense of what is happening and where I'm at with the project. Sorry, I forgot to mention also. It's going to be activated at times through a series of performances with different musicians I've met here. Here's sort of a work in progress with Lee Chin Lee, who you saw earlier. And so I know many of you will be leaving soon, but if you'd like to come visit the studio, I'd be happy to show you what I'm working on in person. But again, thank you to Fulbright and to NTU for supporting this project.
Thank you very much, Dr. Parker. If you have any questions to ask Dr. Parker, please feel free to raise your. Okay.
Thank you. That was great. I have a question about the Chang instrument and whether that has that always been sort of played and studied, or is it sort of gone away? And is there a resurgence in interest in that? Is it like a retro cool thing, or is it sort of always been in the mix here, as far as you know?
Well, I'm not a musicologist, so I would defer to someone else for that. But I think it's been widely played for a while. It's still widely used in traditional Chinese orchestras, but probably since the 50s, I would say it's sort of captivated the imagination of a number of Western composers, people like John Cage, Dai Fujikura more recently, who's written a lot for the Japanese show, which is kind of a very similar instrument functionally. Yeah, I don't know about the trends of it, but I mean, I just find it to be the coolest instrument in existence. So that's why it interests me.
Hi, I was really interested in I guess the more community and ecological aspect of your work. Especially how I don't know, I just thought it was so interesting that you're integrating just performers that aren't typically who you'd expect to be musicians, just regular community members and even animals. So do you mind just talking about what inspired you to kind of go that approach?
Sure. I think from a sort of a conceptual approach, I'm really interested in what became kind of codified in the mid 20th century, like chance operations, like incorporating randomness into performances rather than the composer having there was always a pendulum, I suppose, of composers having a certain degree of control over and sort of especially in the work of people like Schoenberg or Webern, wanting to control every parameter of sound, which yields a singular vision from that composer, but also kind of limits the scope of what you can produce. And I'm more interested in introducing randomness, which happens when you're working certainly with animals, but also with performers who maybe don't identify as trained performers, because they will interpret things in a much broader way. And then I think from more a human side, I'm also very interested in the aliveness of performance and what can make things feel expressive. And I think there's a certain electricity in working with members of the public that you don't get with people who are accustomed to performing and accustomed to being in front of an audience. And there's a certain electricity and sort of aliveness, no other word for me to describe it, that I find is present when you're working with viewers.
Okay, we are taking one last question. Okay.
No. We can talk about the frogs too. No, my question is a little related to what she was saying. I'm curious about your only been here for 3 months. I'm curious about how your musical past connects with the Taiwanese musical past as you interact with them. Because Steve Reich is very Western music influenced by Eastern music. And so I'm sort of curious about the bouncing back and forth between you as a Western artist interacting with artists in Taiwan.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I am trained as a classical orchestral musician, also a jazz musician in Western styles, but often most of the performance that I do these days is more like improvised music, you might call, for lack of a better word, and often that brings together a lot of non-Western or non-like codified approaches or non-academic approaches, and a lot of it is about forgetting the frameworks that you have or the baggage that you have as a performer. So that's always something that I wrestle with as I'm engaging in these sorts of environments. But I haven't found that to be that much different in these sorts of improvised music contexts. There's also like quite a bit of exchange between different improvised music performers here in Taiwan, and also those who are working in like noise or sort of whatever you want to talk about, but like people just producing sound. And there's like a fairly robust community, tight-knit community of performers, and it hasn't been as I haven't really encountered it. Hasn't felt that much different in that sort of environment. So that's been very an unintended sort of result in that. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Parker. So now thank you. We are welcoming our next speaker, Dr. Maurice Zhang, and
Yep, that's one. Thank you. Thank you for coming for my presentation. My name is Zhang Ziren. This is the executive summary of my project titled Privacy Preserving Machine Learning. I'm in the engineering. I project involved the research and the teaching activity and some other visiting activity. I'm going to go over some of them, but I want to start off with the technical part of my work, basically the research and the teaching. So I start out this area that around 10 years ago with a project under the Department of Defense, DAPA project. So I get to see the technology that used to help to preserve the privacy that when we go on the internet computation. So one of the interesting part of this DoD project named after the Louis Brandeis, he's the great lawyer who actually published the paper 130 some years ago about the right to the privacy. So he has one of the most memorable phrase in the book. In the paper is called the right to be let alone. So the Department of Defense actually named the program after him, is hoping to finding out some technology that we will be able to preserve the privacy on the internet. And that project that get me into this technology and also lead to a book. And I want to acknowledge that I have a few of the people help me in the throughout this project. My PhD student and also Dr. Pei Yuan Wu is here with me today. And so we get into this area in the research, and I'm glad that I would be able to
through the Fulbright program, I was ended up teaching a course that using this newly published book at the National Taiwan University. So the look back, the very first example, Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica scandal that sort of making this this topic become very popular. Although we started the project that way back 2014, but you probably all see the interesting part is 2018 that in the Congress, the Mark Zuckerberg was calling in for a hearing because the this scandal that starting out from the 2014 that asking the people to install the quiz to answering a few questions. And actually only about 300,000 people involved on this survey, but because that involved their friends and their families, their colleagues, so altogether around the 87 million people. So the Facebook that collecting the information about those people and sent to the Cambridge Analytica. This is a company that analyzing the data and then try to provide the psychological profile of the voters that for the interesting party in the U.S. So this led to the probably the first and the most well-known scandal in this issue. And really, there's no law to actually fine. So they end up with going through the Free Trade Commission that fined the Facebook for $5.5 billion. And then later on in the 2020, that another privacy scandal that is again is with the Facebook that agreed to pay $550 million. This is violating the Illinois biometric privacy law. If you use the Facebook early days, that there's a feature that allow you to submit the upload the photo, and they give you the suggestion who are in the photo. That's referring to the tag suggestion feature. The idea is that they're using the photo they collect and performing the machine learning for the face recognition, and they lead to this issue. So this feature actually no longer exists, but those are the history that shows the importance of the privacy preservation in the machine learning. And the most recent example is the Siri privacy lawsuit that actually still ongoing, that if you actually use the Siri between the 2014 and 2024, 10 years, you actually eligible to file a claim. So those are the cases that motivate the people that study the technique for the privacy preservation. So the Siri case is that because the user that discuss calling the Siri to asking for the which brand, which restaurant to go, which brand of the clothing to suggest, and eventually those information are harvested and then used for the Apple search and the their Safari web browser. So those are the cases that shows the today's technology that we use every day that potentially can lead to the privacy violation. So the machine learning as a service is through the analytical platform that we use, very common today, basically bundling the cloud-based machine learning and the computing resource together. There was many of them, but one that we use very common lately is the OpenAI ChatGPT. And one of the interesting scandal that on this case is the Samsung engineer used the ChatGPT to polish their presentation slides, technical report, and the ChatGPT actually learned the information, proprietary information from those documents that eventually they may use for some other things. So the privacy issues here is that the personal data, that including the document I mentioned, can be repurposed, reproduced in a different way. That's kind of leading to the modern privacy issue. So there were several attacks and the threats that a little technical, but basically shows that we use a lot of AI model, but there was all kind of different technique, reconstruction attack, membership inference attack. Those are referring to the malicious user may try to find out who actually used in building those AI model. For example, that you might curious about whether your neighbor who actually you probably observe that he or she has a certain medical condition. You were wondering whether those information being used to build some machine learning models. And that can be part of this membership inference attack. And so there were many techniques that can be used to enhance the privacy preservation. But if I want to talk a very general way, they fall into some category. One is a perturbation. If you look at the TV in the Taiwan, that when they show a certain event, they put a mosaic on the people's face. That actually preserve the privacy of the people in the video of the news. That fall into the perturbation. There was some terminology here. I won't go into that. Differential privacy, compressive privacy, those are fall into the perturbation. But there are other techniques such as that synthetic data generation. You might be able to take the real data, but extract the statistical information, and then you generate the synthetic data. And those synthetic data can be used for the analysis, machine learning, that sort of application. And the data mining, and also can involve with the privacy preservation technique. So I conducted the research and also teaching on those techniques. And so I offered a lecture at the NTU to talk about the privacy preservation, machine learning, and introduce those techniques. And also a meeting with the graduate student and the group meeting and discussion about various paper, technical discussion technique. And also that I also meet with the other Fulbright scholar. So there were some Air Force Research Lab visitor that coming from the Japan, and they actually support one of the project at the NTU electrical engineering professor, my collaborator, my host, Professor Wu, and there was some other professors from the department that we engaged the discussion. So I also do some seminars at the Tatung University. And this is interesting slides. I combining multiple things that over here that you probably can see that I gave them a lot of homework assignment. There was a different technique on the machine learning. The DP is referring to the differential privacy. And so I covered the material, the slides based on the book, but I gave them the assignment. They have to go back home and then do the writing the program and run the result and the upload. This is the tour. This is a tour that from the NTU Cool. This is the interesting things. You know, we getting nervous when we get into a new teaching environment that, you know, they use a different system. But once that's what I thought initially, but once I get into the NTU Cool system, I feel like home. It's actually Canvas. Okay, we use Canvas in the U.S. So that was something really nice. I gave them a homework and so assignment and the final project and the midterm. I submitted the grade yesterday. Just a really good experience. Just want to touch on this slides that I like this picture because I also mentioned about what's happening in the NVIDIA. Okay, so this is a little technical called the federated learning, but they use a very nice term called the FLAIR. It's called the Federated Learning Application Runtime Environment. So just not, it's important that to bridge the gap between the academic theoretical versus industrial practice. So I was able to talk about the practice from the NVIDIA. It's actually their website, their collection of the machine learning technique library called the FLAIR. So that actually is their collection, the program solution for the privacy preservation. So that's a good point that I kind of connect between the theory with the industrial practice with this particular lecture. And that picture over there, student making the presentation on the right upper corner, student making the presentation, and I was able to interact with the student in the classroom. So that's the what I do in the teaching part. I also lecture at the different university and interact with the student. And this is at the southern part of the Taiwan, Kaohsiung University of Science and Technology. And this is my host, Professor Chang. He actually graduated from the Illinois Institute of Technology with a PhD in computer science. It just really remind me that my early day, I was an assistant professor at the IIT way back. He was a PhD student back then. I think this was 1998. Boy. So this is his website, and he invited me, and I was there to give a talk. It's really huge classroom, and they gave me a certificate, which is very nice. And the weather is a little warm than the Taipei. And then I went to the Union University of Science Technology. They made a very nice poster to announce my talk. Initially, I was not really sure about this. If you read it in Chinese, it's a 丰泰大师讲座. And the English is AI for Anything Forum. Fengtai, eventually I realized the Fengtai is one of the big company. They are actually the biggest supplier for the Nike shoes. I'm glad to learn that because I really like Nike shoes, but never really realized that I end up with giving a talk supported by that organization. So they have a really nice lotus pond, as you can see right here. This is the President Chang of the Union University of Science Technology. On the back is a lotus pond. It's very, very nice. They have a huge classroom, and that's my poster. And I wear my Fulbright shorts in that talk. And this is the certificate that they gave to me. This is my last slides. I spent a lot of time at the NTU's faculty and staff badminton club. They practice every Monday and the Thursday, and have about maybe 20 to 30 people come. The whole club maybe have 50 people, faculty and the staff. It's really competitive. I rank consistently at the bottom of the whole, every time. But I certainly missed home. I rank high in the USF, okay? As you can see that I was the champion with the men's double with the university with a 50,000 students. This is intramural game. But anyway, thank you for the coming to my presentation and the open for questions.
Hi, yeah, I really appreciated this talk. I was curious because most of the time when we talk about this problem of maintaining privacy, the solutions that people bring up are policy solutions that we have to sort of through law or policy restrict what sorts of data these companies are even allowed to collect. But you're talking about here technical solutions, that there are perhaps more ethical and more privacy preserving ways of collecting the data itself. What do you see as the limitations of the technical approach? And what do you see as the limitations of the policy approach as well?
I probably answer the technical part. The policy part, I only observed that it changes so rapidly, especially in the Europe and the US. Most of the case that I should say all of the case that I cover are the case in the US. I don't see much activity in Taiwan in terms of the policy or any violation or fine or anything like here. But let's go back to the technical part that obviously this area started earlier in the US, and the Department of Defense has the vision that this is an important area, as I'm showing that starting from 2015, even way before the Facebook scandal of 2018 that make this issue become a popular issue. So the technique changing still rapidly. The reason is because the AI technique itself changes very rapidly. As I mentioned, that the large language model that we use today, like a ChatGPT, they actually has a lot of different challenge. One of the solutions that people use today is that let's just build our own large language model, not sharing with the other people. This is equivalent to something that if you don't go on internet, you will not leak your privacy. But that's not really the right way to do. So this is really at the beginning of. But the things that making this harder is because the technology of the AI changing so rapidly. The older technology has the older privacy issue, but you just keep seeing that the new privacy issue emerge with the new technology. The solution that we have for them right now is kind of moving into try to preserve the privacy, but not impact to the performance of the artificial intelligence. Okay, so if I can give you a simple example, if I use the Mossack to the face, if you put a really large black box under the face, you hide everything, but you have no information. Okay, if you have no information, then it's useless. That's referring to the utility. So very often that we're making a trade-off between the utility versus privacy. You want the data to be useful, to be meaningful, but on the other side, that you want to hide the privacy-related issue with the information. Okay, so that's the trade-off that we face that today. But the technology changing, the issue changing, but I'm just giving you a very general way to see the limitation on that. Okay. Any other questions you may have?
Hello. Thank you so much for your presentation. And it was funny that I'm kind of like the first generation of when NTU changed to the core system. So from a user experience, it was really interesting that when I study in the US and the system is similar. So it was really interesting to see see that. And my question is that the model or the example that you share with us today is mainly focused on like private company or for commercial use. And I'm curious if there's a discussion around data collection from the public sector and how they protect individual information. Because, for example, in the social service system, like in child welfare system, they collect a lot of clients' information and using them to build predictive risk modeling to help social workers to make decisions. But clients are in a less like not a very great position in terms of power dynamics to opt out of their the services, and it's also a service record. So I'm just curious if there's discussion around data collection in public sector. Thank you.
Okay, let me start off with like two type of categories. One is a profit oriented. We use Facebook, we use Gmail for free, and they collect our data for profit. It's a fair game, okay? Because you use free, and then they use your data for something else to generate the profit. But on the other side, there's a nonprofit hospital collecting a lot of data from the patient. I like to use the different name to refer to the artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is data-driven intelligence. It's not real intelligence. It's fully based on the data. In other words, the more data, it's getting more intelligent because it's data-driven intelligence. So for the nonprofit organization that the hospital collecting a lot of patient information can actually help artificial intelligence become smarter, intelligent. However, you are afraid of to sharing the data among the different hospital, among the different medical institutions. So how can we putting those data together to build a smarter system, smarter AI model that actually can benefit for the health, for the medical research? That's for the nonprofit, but you want to collecting the data, but not violating the data privacy. So there's another angle that you really want to have the technology that can preserve the privacy, at the same time promoting collecting the data together, because the more data actually build a better model. So that's for the nonprofit. So the techniques is important that for profit model I mentioned earlier, of course, they're getting a lot of lawsuit I mentioned earlier, the Apple and the Facebook. But on the other side, we are hoping that the technique can help for the nonprofit application, such as the patient data. Okay, so the data collection, I may not answer your question directly, but I answer that from the purpose, the benefit that using the data for the profit and nonprofit. I hope that I answer your question. Thank you. Any other?
Yeah,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, then we can take one more question. If anyone has it. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So we're coming to our second coffee break. And after this, we'll have Mr. Nathaniel Pigott and Dr. Elsa Fan to present for us. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. So it will be 4:20 p.m. Okay, thank you. So, hello everyone. So, we're going to start the two last presentations of today. So first up, I would like to welcome Mr. Nathaniel Pigott to present for us for his past work here in Taiwan.
Yes. All right, lovely. Hello, everyone. My name is Nathaniel Pigott. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine, and I have had the pleasure of spending the last 9 months of my life getting to research the sport of ping pong, which has been really exciting. As you can see by the title, I sort of craftily avoid doing ping pong diplomacy. I'm really interested in the history of the ping pong in the Republic of China, both when the Republic was on the mainland in the 1920s and 30s during something called the Nanjing Decade, as well as after the Republic of China moved over here to Taiwan. As you can also see from the title, I'm sort of doing this as several episodes. I don't really have one continuous argument or one continuous conclusion just yet, but there were many, many things that happened this year that surprised me, and so I wanted to highlight some of those surprises for you all today. Oh, that's the wrong direction. There we go. So for anyone who has not had the lore of my past presentations, I did just want to give some background about my project and why I found it so interesting. The story of ping pong in China really begins in the 1920s and 30s, when China was not in very good shape. It had just lost a series of wars to a number of imperial powers, and it had just gone through a period of warlord rule. And one of the things that all of these losses and sort of the division of the warlords caused was a lot of introspection from a number of Chinese thinkers and Chinese leaders about what was going so wrong, about why China was so weak in comparison to these other states. And one of the many, many answers that they came to, they had a lot of answers to this question, but one of the answers to this question was the physical weakness of the Chinese body, both sort of individual Chinese people as well as sort of the metaphorical Chinese body politic, if you will. And so the solution to this problem of weak physicalities, weak physiques, was something called the physical education movement, the Tiyu Yudong. And the idea behind the physical education movement is that, on the one hand, we can physically strengthen Chinese bodies through exercise, and on the other hand, hopefully, by doing this exercise, by participating in these exercises with one another, people will start to think of themselves as this cohesive whole, as part of the Chinese nation. The movement, though, the physical education movement, was by no means one that was free of conflict. And one of the main conflicts of the physical education movement was this conflict between elite sport versus mass sport. That there was one faction of these guys who thought the way to strengthen China would be through something like the International Olympic movement, that we can participate in these elite sports, we can train elite athletes, and we can show Chinese strength on the international stage in this way. Another faction, on the other hand, and this was the faction that the KMT and its leadership belonged to, was this faction of mass sport. This idea that we've got to get everybody involved across the whole nation doing these strengthening exercises. And we want them to do regimes of stuff like military drills and calisthenics to get them sort of the operative metaphor was to get them all participating in the machine of the nation, that we wanted everybody to be a cog in this machine. And so this was sort of the operative conflict in the physical education movement throughout the 1920s and 30s as to what the direction we wanted to go with China was. Was it going to become this sort of internationalist participatory movement, or was it going to become this military style, almost fascistic movement? And so that's one of the things that I found really interesting about ping pong in this period is I found this group of guys in the 1920s and 30s who were really, really passionate about a really, really strange sport that doesn't seem to solve any of the problems of either the elite side or the mass side. The problem with the elite side is that ping pong was not an Olympic sport at this time, and it was not very popular internationally at this time. So it doesn't really make sense to choose it as a sport to kind of boost China's image on the international stage. And obviously the problem with it being a mass sport is it's not this sort of lockstep military style approach to physical education. And yet, what I thought I saw in the arguments that these guys were making for ping pong was this really, really interesting compromise that, in fact, ping pong maybe wasn't perfect for either side of this debate, but it could actually satisfy both sides of this debate. And I thought this was so innovative and creative. And so you can see one of the guys that I was looking at, Zhang Yongzheng, he had several ideas for why ping pong would be so perfect for China. He thought it was very economical. He thought it was very accessible, that whether one was a man or a woman, young or old, rich or poor, they could all participate in ping pong. He thought that it could be done at any time or any place. And he had this really interesting argument, and really creative argument, I thought, at first, initially, that ping pong does not have this violent aspect to it. That's not a contact sport. And therefore, there are far fewer risks to doing ping pong. And so you will not harm your body in the process of strengthening your body. And I thought all of these ideas were really, really cool. And then I started realizing that they were also really, really strangely consistent across basically all writing on ping pong in the period. In fact, suspiciously consistent. In fact, it was almost like they were all copying the same argument over and over and over. And another curious thing that I started to figure out was that some of their arguments that were very consistent, they didn't make a whole lot of sense. One of these was the idea that ping pong is a full body sport, that it uses all four limbs and it develops the entire body evenly. I don't know if any of you guys have played ping pong, but when I've played ping pong, mostly what I use is my right hand. And so I was a bit suspicious as to why this was such a common point in all of these arguments for ping pong if it doesn't seem to really hold that much weight. And that is when we found the actual source of all of these arguments. And this came from a 1928 manifesto for something called 国术. And as you can see, many of the exact same ideas reappear. The idea that it is sort of noble and elevated, that it is a sport that uses all four limbs and evenly develops the body, that it does not have the drawback of risk or over-intensity. This is language that gets repeated, that it does not suffer economic constraints, that it can be massified, that it's accessible to men and women, rich and poor, young and old, and unconstrained by time, any place you can play it. So what was 国术? 国术 was a KMT-sponsored physical education movement. It was a martial arts revivalist movement that had the full backing of the government. And so what I discovered is that ping pong players were writing these arguments in this way, primarily because they were trying to make ping pong look like 国术. That they wanted the sponsorship of the government. And so in order to do that, they thought that it would be a good idea to just rip off the KMT's argument point for point. And so this was really surprising to me. I had thought that these were these sort of like innovative, compromising thinkers, when in fact they were just drawing basically all of their language directly from the state. And so on the one hand, ping pong indeed was still a compromise, that they were trying to take these arguments for 国术 and apply them to an elite sport. But on the other hand, it wasn't actually a creative argument, that this was quite the derivative argument. And so it got me thinking a lot, and this is one of the things that I haven't worked out entirely, but it got me thinking a lot about state-society relations and what happens when the state speaks, when the state is trying to talk to people. That you have this really interesting example here of 国术 and ping pong, where it's very clear people are listening to the state, that they're paying attention to what they're saying, but they're not really like hearing the state. They're not paying attention to what the state means. And they're taking what the state is saying and applying it to sort of whatever they wanted to do in the first place anyway. And so I think, yeah, that's one of the really interesting things, I think, about the case of ping pong, is that it was the first instance of these supporters for an elite Western sport, basically point for point, taking the language of the state and reapplying it to what they actually wanted to do. Another surprise that sort of came from my own, I think, desires that I was putting on the people that I was reading is I was really hoping that this was just sort of a gaggle of guys who were passionate about ping pong purely for the love of the game, purely for the love of the sport, and that there were no sort of alternative reasons that they were so interested in this particular activity over all others. The more I started reading, however, the more I realized that that's just not true. It was true in certain cases. I do think there were some very impassioned ping pong lovers during the period. At the same time, there was quite a significant business interest in ping pong as well. This primarily came from something called the China Ping Pong Company, the 中国乒乓公司. And this company primarily manufactured ping pong balls. They did some other like ping pong equipment stuff, but the main product was balls, because ping pong balls are a little bit tricky to manufacture. You have to get them quite thin. They're made of this very elastic plastic material. And this was the main thing that the China Ping Pong Company did. What I discovered is that basically all of the essays that I read advocating for ping pong, saying ping pong was the best sport for the Chinese nation, were written in these ping pong sports magazines that you can see here. There were quite a few of them, and this is quite strange. There aren't other like sports specific magazines like this. There are general interest sports magazines from the period, but those magazines all cover like basketball and soccer and volleyball, what have you. These magazines were completely and utterly devoted to ping pong. And the reason why is that they are all edited by the same guy. His name was Wang Yi, who just also happens to be the manager at the China Ping Pong Company. And in fact, the relationship between the printing world in Shanghai at the time and the ping pong world in Shanghai at the time was incredibly, incredibly close. The reason for this is that basically the managers and all the investors at the China Ping Pong Company, it turns out when you look up each one name by name, they were all bigwigs at publishing companies, that they were all either investors or managers or editors at these publishing companies. Why? The reason why is that ping pong equipment at the time was primarily not sold in sports equipment stores. It was primarily sold in book and stationery stores. So that's what you're seeing with this advertisement here. I think Evan already tried. Oh, I do have a laser pointer. Okay. What you see here is that these international standard ping pong balls, these 国际标准乒乓球, are sold in every place in all sorts of stores, but in every big bookstore, like the Zhonghua Shuju. The Zhonghua Shuju was where Wang Yi used to work. And so that is sort of one of the mysteries that I uncovered over the course of the year, is that there was this cabal of editors and sellers who sort of conspired to make ping pong a thing in the Shanghai of the 1920s and 30s. And so it was not exactly these sort of selfless ping pong lovers who were doing it just for the love of the sport. Another thing that surprised me about this year was that when I began in my very first Fulbright presentation, I was asked about sort of like my methodology, and I sort of laughed because historians all have the same methodology. We just go and we read stuff. And that's what I thought I would be doing primarily here. That's not what I ended up doing. I surprised myself by ending up doing a lot of oral histories. The reason I did this is because I became interested, of course, in the history of ping pong in Taiwan as well. And what happened is I tried to look for the stuff that I wanted to get my grubby hand on, which was a bunch of written sources, like what I'd been using for the 1920s and 30s. And over again, I got told by people, those don't exist. I'm very interested in grassroots and grassroots development. The problem with that is that in Taiwan, all of these grassroots organizations mostly didn't have offices. They were just run out of people's houses, and people threw stuff away. Several times people were like, oh yeah, that got, like, my house got flooded during a typhoon and all the papers were destroyed. And so there's not actually a lot of printed material to work with. There's regular newspaper archives and stuff of that nature, but nothing from the organizations themselves. But there are the people. The people still exist, including this guy, Liao Xueyong, who is one of the big veterans of Taiwanese ping pong, and he knew some of the very earliest coaches to come over from the mainland after 49. He also knew a lot of the coaches to come back from Japan, because Taiwan actually sent ping pong players over to compete in Japan, who then came back and became coaches, and he knew all of them personally, which is really cool to talk with him about. And so I did a lot of these oral history interviews. I got to talk with leadership at some of the major ping pong institutes here in Taiwan, as well as some older generations of 选手, of 国手, as well as getting to interview some rather famous coaches, which was very fun, and going to their training institute in Kaohsiung. And so in the process of doing these oral interviews, obviously I was coming from my background of studying the 1920s and 30s, and I was really interested in this question of grassroots sports, of the relationship between sort of ground up grassroots organization versus directed sort of state down, top down, like telling people to play sports, these state directed movements. And so I would poke and prod in my interviews about these things, about like, do you consider your organization to be grassroots? Do you consider it to be part of the state? If you wanted to organize a ping pong tournament in Taiwan, for example, how would you go about doing that? Would you consider, like, could you do it all on your own, or would you need the state's intervention? And again, I think I went into this process in the headspace of, oh, what I'm going to find out is probably the state pays lip service to these things. It says, oh, ping pong is good and fine, but the actual impetus for doing and playing ping pong is all going to come from the grassroots, from everyday sort of social organization. And what I found was that that assumption was both true and not true in very interesting ways, that the picture of the relationship between grassroots organization and the state in Taiwan is way more complex and gray than I expected it to be, even though I was drawing on like Timothy Mitchell's The State Effect, which the argument is all about how gray this stuff is. It was even though I was drawing on that, it was much grayer than I was expecting. And I had a lot of examples where even the people I was talking to weren't exactly clear on whether they themselves were grassroots or doing stuff on behalf of the state. And so you have these examples of like trying to organize a ping pong tournament. You can do it on your own, but if it involves international athletes, you need the approval of the lead ping pong organization here in Taiwan, who typically in turn needs the approval of the state. Usually a lot of these tournaments get funded. They're like quote unquote self-funded. And so it's the director of whatever organization is trying to organize the tournament is funding that, but oftentimes they can then apply to funding from the state. Historically, all sports organizations in Taiwan were 所谓的民间, like they were supposed to be in the public. But then I would talk to other people and they were like, oh yeah, but the KMT would assign the leaders of all those organizations. And so in case after case, you find examples where there is sort of force and motivation from both ends, that the government is clearly funding these things and directing these things, also at the behest of people who are trying to organize things for themselves. Another funny example of this is and this has historically been true, a lot of teams in Taiwan are organized by private businesses, especially banks. But it was originally the KMT who told them to do that. They sort of volunteered these businesses to sponsor individual athletes as well as teams, but they still do it today, even though they don't have to anymore. And so again, it's these really interesting gray areas between, like, yes, there is this private interest in doing these things, but also it sort of originally came as a direction from the state. And so those were some of my biggest surprises that I encountered in my year in Taiwan here. I had an excellent time. I had so much fun, and I got to travel all sorts of places, talking to all sorts of ping pong players. So I want to close here just thanking again Fulbright Academia Sinica, my advisor Wendy Fu, and all of the ping pong lovers I've encountered along the way. So thank you guys so much.
Okay, we are taking questions. If you have any questions to Nathaniel, okay.
Thank you. I've been interested in this since your first presentation back in September. Sorry, I don't know if I have a question yet, but I'm really interested in the sources of the popularity of ping pong in the pre-war period, because it looks like it was, you know, big Shanghai capitalists who were driving it. So there's some sort of maybe interesting twists on older work by Marie-Claire Bergère and Sherman Cochran on sort of Shanghai business elites. But then what seems to have happened is that the state captured them. Is that accurate? Is that what explains the much greater state control in the post-war period? Were any of these early ping pong enthusiasts, did they come across to Taiwan after, and did then they ally themselves more strongly with the state? Vague questions.
Yeah, surprisingly, no. In terms of, like, did a lot of ping pong players from the mainland end up coming over to Taiwan and sort of spreading the love of ping pong here, or helping out the government in improving ping pong here? The answer to that is pretty much no. There were two or three major coaches who came over from Shanghai, which is not a lot. And one of the main coach had actually moved to Taiwan prior to World War II. And he was good. He actually won ping pong for Taiwan in the 1948 national games, which was the only national games that included both the mainland and Taiwan. And so he was still a coach here after that. But he's about the only example I could find. And when I ask people about, like, sort of the relative interest between, or the relative influence between the mainland and Japan, everyone says it's all Japan, that it was actually Japanese influence that made ping pong pretty popular and widespread in Taiwan to begin with, and the government then did capture that and siphon it into something that they could use for their foreign policy goals. Yes, and then of course in the PRC, state capture was pretty complete, although as far as I can tell, the political outlook of the state was so like discongruous with the political outlook of these ping pong players. I've been unable to find any continuity actually between these worlds, that there were a lot of people growing up in Shanghai who were interested in ping pong because of the work that these guys were doing, but they were not then sort of like put in charge or anything of that nature, mostly because they worked with the Japanese. A lot of these guys stayed behind in Shanghai after the Japanese invasion, and in the, like, Shanghai municipal archives, a lot of their names get slapped with "Wei," which is not something that's good. Yeah.
We can take another question. So if you have any questions to...
Thanks for the awesome presentation. I would love to just hear more about your oral history interviews. Because I know you talked about how like, is this like an anarchist sport or is this like a national, t takedown? But like, yeah, I don't know, like what sort of like surprises did you find from the interviews? What's any like stories that really captured your heart? And also like how is your like like it's just funny watching and seeing this photo with this like classic old like abe or like agong at that point. Like yeah, like can you tell us about how you developed that relationship? Yeah, like what was the conversation like?
Okay, lots to potentially tackle there. Let's start with surprises from the oral history interviews. I think the biggest surprise by far to me was them not wanting to talk about politics ever. That politics never came up naturally. And when I brought it up, they weren't really interested. They weren't like trying to shut me down. They weren't like, we can't talk about this. But they seemed confused as to why I even brought it up because they were like, I thought we were talking about ping pong. And I'm like, but you guys were like playing the Chinese communists and like competing with them, and they were boxing you out of these international competitions. Like, did that not matter to you? And the response was primarily no. And I don't know if that response came from the particular sort of positionality I had when I was doing these interviews, that they either didn't want to talk about this with me or thought it wasn't appropriate. Because a lot of these interviews tended to be me trying to get around them being very like Chengji oriented. That like, oh, look at all the stuff that we've accomplished and all the stuff we've done, which makes sense because a lot of these guys have been like organizers and directors of these institutions for many, many years now. Another surprise from the oral history interviews, I would say, was again, I was going in with this sort of state society dichotomy in mind, and that was not at all the dichotomy that they had in their heads. The primary dichotomy that a lot of the younger people I talked to had was about generations. That when I asked about sort of like conflict in the world of ping pong, I was expecting like, oh, the state has these expectations, but you guys actually wanted to do this stuff. And in fact, that tended not to be the case, and that it was sort of this older generation had expectations for how things were to be organized. And if the younger generation wanted to like update it or modernize it in any way, that the state was in fact usually their ally in this process, that they could go through government funding and government sports organizations in order to try to pressure this sort of like generation in power into changing. Stories, again, it was like weirdly hard to get them to tell me stories. I really wanted them to tell me stories, and I had to deal with this sort of overcoming the like Chengji mentality. I did like this guy was by far my best interviewee. He rocked, even though he was very, very difficult for me to understand, because he had a very, very thick like his first language is Thai, and I think his second language is Japanese. And so Mandarin was his third language, and so we're making it work. But he had by far the most stories, and like an incredible memory. Like he would tell me dates things happened, and I'd be like, oh, let me double check that. And he'd usually be right, or at least not far off, down to the day. And so he was by far my most interesting interview. And he had lots of stories about sort of his life was very much sort of dominated by the history of sports and academia. Like he became a professor at a university. And so a lot of his stories were about trying to get hired and like trying to optimize his resume for the job market, which was like stuff that I was not at all expecting when I was talking to him about ping pong. But he was like, yeah, I like had to publish a bunch of news articles so that the colleges would be interested in me. So very relatable as well. I think I've probably gone past my time. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes, you're correct. Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you again. So coming up to the last presentation of the day, and for our host session, let's welcome Dr. Elsa